All right. So the idea that I've put thought into this is perhaps an optimistic one, but as you might imagine, you've been a topic of conversation on this campus a lot in the past week or so, certainly among a lot of us who discuss politics. And one of the things that sort of united people who like and dislike a lot of your ideas is that we appreciate your defense of free speech, and we appreciate you coming here to talk about it with us. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is Professor Van Dyke addressed the distinction between you and Jonathan Haidt. And you mentioned this as sort of a temperamental one. And I think, I'm sure that's true to some extent, but I noticed you've made a lot of more sort of substantively inflammatory claims. Like in the course of this lecture, you called the authors of Facebook posts demons and totalitarians. In past events, you've called them things like neo-Marxists, cultural Marxists. You've called them, I believe, a fifth column that is committing treason against the West. And it seems to me this is more than temperamental. This is a substantive difference. And
it's a substantive difference,
yes. And another thing you've done is that, unlike Haidt, you have a more sort of comprehensive political program. You've talked a lot in defense of traditional hierarchies, both of gender, of class, so on, though emphatically not of race. And so it seems that
I haven't talked about defense of traditional hierarchies in terms of gender and class. That's not true.
Well, you've talked about hierarchies in society. You've talked about
that's true. I have done that, but I haven't justified them on the basis of gender and class. Whatever it was,
okay,
categories.
You talk
not
about,
okay. That's an important distinction.
Okay, but you defend hierarchies in society in a way that you talk a lot about the Pareto distribution. Yes.
That doesn't mean I defend it.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think you talk
Observing that something exists is not the same as defending it. How in the world?
Well, people attack it, right?
What's that?
And you don't. People attack it.
Attack
attack the hierarchies of society as inherently unjust, right?
Well, they're unjust, but they're also useful.
Okay, so you say they're useful. Some
people
would disagree
look at
with
it
that
this
proposition.
way. Okay, look at it this way. You obviously think that it's worthwhile to stand up and ask a question.
Yes.
So you think that standing up and asking a question is better than not standing up and asking a question.
Yes.
Okay, that's a hierarchy.
Yes.
Of values.
Yes.
Okay, without the hierarchy of values, you couldn't act.
Of course.
No, not of course.
Well, wait.
It's partly why I'm defending the hierarchy. Without a hierarchy, there's no impetus to act.
Hierarchy, right?
What's that?
There is a hierarchy in society, right?
No, there's multiple hierarchies in
society. There are multiple
society.
hierarchies in society, right?
Yes.
And you say that they are based in, you invoke the lobster, right? That they are based in nature.
Yes? I said that they were inevitable.
Yes, that they were inevitable. Some people disagree with that.
That doesn't mean that they're good.
But my point is that, this is generally relevant to it, you have a broader point than free speech. This is one of the things you talk about, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Whereas I think there are some other activists who focus on more exclusively
I'm not
on
an
free
activist.
Speech. There are some other individuals who engage in public political speech. Okay.
Yeah.
Who focus more exclusively on free speech, whereas you have other goals in mind. But one of the things that your more inflammatory language, and it's fair, it's a substantive disagreement, has done, I think, is it's politicized this free speech to an extent that someone like Haidt hasn't. I've noticed that when someone hears the term free speech now, they associate it with a specific set of thinkers, often as viewed as on the extreme right. And I think arguably that's the problem of all factions in society, because free speech should be a universal value. Polls certainly suggest that it's coming under increasing threat from both sides. But I suppose the heart of my question, in addition to, of course, these other observations, is that do you believe free speech is your primary end, or do you believe these other points you're making are important? Because I've heard you a bunch of times defend free speech sort of contextually, like you've complained about some of the laws in Canada that you dislike, that they institutionalize false facts into the law. But it seems to me that an absolutist defense of free speech makes no preference as to true or false. The point is that something you are being forced to say something. It would be as bad as if you were forced to say something that is true, because the point of free speech is that you can say whatever you want, right?
No, the point of free speech is so that you can think your way through life without running headlong into a brick wall. But being told to think
position A versus position B is just as bad, right? Even if one is true and the other is not.
Okay, well, there was a bunch of questions.
Yes.
Good job, by the way.
Well, actually, wait, can I just ask one additional addendum? Which is, I think the politicization of free speech is by far the biggest threat to free speech, because this has always been...
No, the radical leftists are the biggest threat to free speech.
So this is a disagreement.
But I get your point.
As the professor alluded to in previous questions, the substantive threats to free speech in much of the world, in Europe certainly, I think in the United States as well, from the government have come from the radical right. And I think it's fair to say that on the specific narrow subset of certain departments on liberal arts colleges, it's fair to say a threat comes from the left, though its scope is in dispute. But my question is, do you think that the way you talk about free speech, the way you link it to specific issues, the way you use inflammatory language, and the way you seem to make it, you seem to defend a specific set of free speech. There are certainly plenty of instances of free speech attacked on the other side that you don't mention as much. Do you think you risk politicizing this? Because it seems to me
yes.
that... Okay, and do you not think that's a far greater threat? Because, for example, the NRA... Well, sorry, the NRA is a group in the United States that defends guns rights, right?
Okay, hold it. Hold it. We need a question.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, like I said, you're doing fine, but it's just too much. Like, I can't keep it straight.
Do you think that your behavior risks politicizing it, and do you think that politicization is justified?
I think my behavior risks politicizing it, yes. I would rather it not be politicized, and I'm doing what I can to manage that risk. However, it's become political in my country because the government implemented compelled speech legislation. So I wasn't complaining about that before it became political. Now, there is a time, even when you're detached in some sense from the political realm, that you can't be detached anymore. Well, I'm not happy with the fact that this has become politicized. You could say that I haven't done a stellar job in ensuring in every possible manner that this has remained neutrally apolitical. Probably true. But I'm not particularly unhappy with the way things have gone so far. And I'm not happy with the radical left. And so if they're irritated at me, so much the better, as far as I'm concerned. So have I conducted myself perfectly? It's like, undoubtedly no. So I've got more than my fair share of faults, and a temper is one of them. But I'm muddling through. Not everybody is equipped to or interested in engaging in high-level discussion of abstract and creative ideas. You hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority, just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted or extremely agreeable or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues, and what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. Heavyweight weightlifters compete with heavyweight weightlifters for a reason, and everyone thinks that's fine. And the same thing applies to intellectual and creative endeavors. So what you do is you try to find a community where that's the nature of the community, and you likely have to find a relationship like that as well. So I don't think so. I think what contributes to the siloing is the arrogance that goes along with it. Because if you can be interested in ideas and you can be creative. Well, that's the arrogance of the intellect, right? That's the thing the Catholic Church had warned about for centuries, is the arrogance of the intellect. So, because if you're wise as well as smart, and there is no relationship between being smart and being wise. They are not the same thing. There's no quick pathway from smart to wise. And many of the people who I've known who were very wise some of them were intellectually impaired and were still wise, So it's the arrogance that brings up the block. And I see this, for example, happening in the United States in particular, because the last time I went down there, for example, I had friends down there, and some of those friends are very, very smart people. And some of them were talking about the Trump voters. And they were talking about the Trump voters with contempt. And I thought, you better watch that, because that's 50% of the damn population. And it might be convenient to think that they're stupid and beneath you, but it's not conducive to a civil state, and there's no evidence that it's true, because there isn't a straight line between intelligent and wise. And so I think that if your character is developed and you're intelligent, you can have your siloed creative community, but you develop enough wisdom so that you can see all the things that people can do that are of high ethical utility that are outside the intellectual domain. And I think that's why in the New Testament, I think that's why Christ is a carpenter. right? Because, well, first of all, a carpenter is one of those jobs that when you're dishonest, it manifests itself immediately because what you build falls down. And so if you're an honest carpenter, you build a good house. So there's a nice metaphor there. But it's also a warning, in some sense, against the equation of intellectual brilliance with moral superiority. And so if the intellects would drop their moral superiority, and fat chance there is of that, then the divide between the working class, say, and the elite would resolve. And there's every reason to have respect for decent working class people. I mean, it's on their labor, as the left-wingers at least hypothetically agree, that the entire edifice of the culture is resting. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to not assume that your niche makes you superior. And it's very difficult for smart people, especially smart. There's this scene in Nietzsche's, it's in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra, the prophet, comes down from the mountain and he comes into a public square. And there's this crowd around this little midget who's only about this high, who has a gigantic ear. And everyone is marveling at him. Well, that's what the modern intellect is like. It's a midget with a giant, well, mouth generally, not an ear. And the being is underdeveloped, but the intellect is hyper activated. And it makes the person extraordinarily unbalanced. And it's partly because they can't compete outside the intellectual realm. And that makes them very bitter because they tend to think, well, God, I'm so smart, everything should just come to me. It's like, sorry, that's not how the world works. And it also, that attitude is immediately evident to people that they're talking to when they talk in the manner that they talk, if they are arrogant intellectuals of that sort. You see that in The Simpsons did a good job of that with Comic Book Guy, right? I mean, he completely useless in every possible dimension with an IQ of about 160. And it's very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless. But it happens a lot, so...